Welcome to Grow For It. It's a podcast for small business owners, managers, and professionals. The goal is to give me a chance to work with the space between your ears, on your mindset, to help you focus on the things that really matter to your success. I want to enable you to concentrate on pursuing your vision, setting meaningful goals, and engaging in the day-to-day activities that will have the biggest impact. Thanks for joining me. All right, friends, welcome back. Today, I've got a good friend in the office. This is Andrew Aebersold. Andrew is the CEO and owner of a digital marketing firm over in Jeffersonville, Indiana, called Mediaura. And if you're not local, Jeffersonville, Indiana is literally right across the Ohio River, so it's kind of in our backyard. So we're looking at different opportunities to talk about different markets that we get involved with. And what we found is that both of us have an interest in cultivating relationships and helping people in the mental health area of healthcare. So I thought I'd bring Andrew in today to the studio and we talk a little bit. Andrew, welcome.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, but I'm excited. We've talked about this for a while. Do us a favor. Tell us a little bit about Mediaura, kind of what you do, how you got there, and kind of where you're going.
Yeah, so Mediaura has been around since 2003. I actually started doing it when I was consulting for other customers, and I just recently met my wife. We weren't married yet, absolutely, but she convinced me that there was an opportunity here, and together we kind of started this company that grew from, kind of working out of our little townhouse in the Highlands to getting an office in downtown Louisville and hiring employees and going for it. So we were there in kind of the earlier days before a lot of the digital marketing stuff existed, building websites and apps and things like that, web apps at the time. But as the other technologies came around, social media and more with Google search and paid advertisements, some of our partners in the industry that we were working with were building websites for them. They said, hey, you guys do digital stuff. Can you figure out how to do these ads? And so we were kind of there on the front lines in the early days doing it. And here we are. This is going to be our 18th year and going stronger than ever. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you do a wide range of services. I mean, you can get into logo development and brand development to the deployment, so website development, social media strategy, all that. A lot of similar things that I do, but we're not exactly congruent. I mean, there are some other capabilities that you bring to the table that I just don't focus on. So it's good to have you in the studio, and we'll kind of unpack that. As we start to look at mental health, I mean, one of the things for me in talking with practitioners is that it's a different kind of marketing. It's a more sensitive. It's a different type of presentation to the consumer market, to the people who might be patients down the road, and it's kind of unique. It's kind of interesting. And I think one of the things that we've talked about from a big picture standpoint is that practitioners are not always good marketers. They're really, really good at what they do, in their office and in therapy sessions, things like that. But this thing called marketing is a whole different breed.
Well, they know how to take care of the patients. They probably know how to get reimbursement taken care of. They write the program material. They understand, how to measure and improve on the quality of treatment. But when it comes to attracting the customer that they're looking for to seek them out for their services, they're generally pretty bad at it. And they kind of know what that person looks like, but they don't really know how to reach them. Now, there's a lot of, traditional business development involved there, and you can hire people with experience, and they'll go and network and make introductions, and that's great. But when it comes to the digital side, they're often just throwing out ideas, trying them, wasting a lot of money in the process.
Yep, absolutely.
And, trying desperately to seek out a partner that's like, I need somebody that really understands my industry, that can help me do what I know I want to do. I just don't know how to do it.
Well, I'm always surprised at just how competitive that segment of healthcare really is. I mean, if you look online or you just drive down the road, you'll see therapist office after therapist office. And then you've got the larger facilities that are inpatient as well. And they're all in some areas bumping up against each other. And then, okay, what kind of therapist is that? What does that really mean? And how do I differentiate as a practitioner? And how do I then target in on the type of client or patient that I really want to go after versus, no, I don't do that. No, I don't really do that. Or I can, but this is not really my core. And helping a practitioner to really, really cultivate and develop that messaging and then deploying that effectively online is a challenge.
It's a challenge because it's not just the individual level of care or the services that you're offering, but it's also the insurance model, right? Are you accepting their insurance? Are they willing to pay something out of pocket? Are you a Medicare or Medicaid facility? And you can't easily target that, right? So most people won't do a qualified search on Google for the type of insurance they have plus the type of treatment they want. So you have to get very creative in how you target the customers, because you could spend a lot of money generating calls and clicks that somebody might be clinically viable, but they're not financially viable for your particular service. And so there are layers and layers of complexity there that the more you start to unravel it, you realize, wow, this is a specialty market. It's a specialty industry. And somebody that is just kind of clicking around and trying to figure out how to buy a Facebook ad on their own, they're probably going to miss the mark by a mile.
Well, and that's if they're even willing to go out on Facebook for something like that and to try to understand. Because in some areas of mental health, there's that peer-to-peer pressure of, well, we don't really advertise and we don't really, and so you've got to break beyond that. Well, I don't want to be that guy or that girl in the practice. I don't want my colleagues to look at me as being kind of an outlier. Well, this is about the health of your practice. Where I tend to focus on the small practice, the solo practitioner, you have more experience actually with larger facility practices.
I do, and not just kind of in our local market, because there are a lot of them kind of in the West Coast or in the Southeast that are willing to spend a lot of money to generate admits or patients. Right? They'll have inpatient services where somebody's flying across the country to go for it, and when you're in that type of a marketplace, you're willing to spend more money to attract them. So that's what has typically gravitated towards our services. And it actually works relatively well if you have somebody that's willing to invest the time and energy to make it work, right? A lot of people don't have the patience to kind of put the effort in to get the result. It's not just what we're doing, it's what collectively we are both doing together. It's part of your how you answer the phone. It's how you respond to those emails. It's how you follow up on the leads. The entire process needs to work together. So, and obviously that takes a little bit of time. You're right.
And I want to segue into that, but before we do, if you're listening to this and you're a mental health practitioner, I want to let you know toward the end of this episode, we're actually going to lay out a number of tips and tactics for you to consider to kind of make it easy for you. If you're doing it on your own, this might give you some ideas on how to do it a little bit better. But at the same time, if you're looking for help, it'll kind of give you some insight into how we approach it. So stick with us as we go through this. Andrew, you had mentioned people flying across country. You do have a specific background in behavioral health practices. Is that right?
Yeah, I've kind of lost track. It's over 12 years. It's not quite 15 years. But in the early days of the business, we got involved with a couple of larger firms. And that's just kind of grown, because what we realized is the specialty of the industry. If somebody knows about you and you're good, you're going to get a referral or recommendation. The flip side of that, and you mentioned how competitive the behavioral healthcare industry itself is, the digital marketing side of it is perhaps even more competitive, because we've seen over the past 10 years all kinds of companies come out of the woodwork and say, hey, I can buy ads on Google, so I'm a digital marketing company. Well, in this industry, anyone that's kind of a survivor or alumni of a program or has gone through treatment then thinks, oh, I really know this industry, so I'm going to be the digital marketer now. And you've got like the double whammy there, where it's not just people wanting to be a digital marketer, but people that have gone through the process. The problem is, and I hate to say it, they're not always good at being a digital marketer.
And this comes back to that initial discussion point about you may be a good practitioner, but maybe not necessarily a good marketer. And decision makers also may not be good digital marketers, but then now they have a person they're trying to promote or trying to support in their new journey. Hey, they've gone through this. This is a big win for us, and maybe we'll help them out, right?
Yeah, I mean, because they're looking at it saying this is a success story. We have somebody that's gone through our process. They've recovered. They're doing great. We kind of want to help them out. We believe in them. They had charisma, good personality. We think they're a good person. All those different things, they may be true, but do they have a background in digital marketing? Are you taking a real gamble on your business? In those situations, it might be better to have them come in a situation like this with us and do kind of a testimonial or a case study or something that they can kind of give back to, but leave the actual marketing of it, especially when you're spending money behind it, to the professionals.
Well, and sometimes they go down that path and suddenly that crashes and burns and they scratch their head either, well, digital marketing must not work, or maybe we need to change it up. Maybe we need to go to a big agency, and that's not always the answer either.
No, I've seen that kind of pendulum effect, right? You try a couple of people that you know or a referral, and they just really weren't, able to generate the results you needed.
Hey, I got a guy.
Yeah, I got a guy. That's what we always hear, right? I know a guy. And it's funny how many people get hired from that. And the problem is in this industry, you have to be extra careful about it. But then they'll swing and go back to a big agency, right? Oh, these guys are top. They work with insert big brand name here, right? And the next thing you know, you're spending 6 figures on a new website that you probably didn't need to spend. You're investing a lot of money in techniques and tactics that might work for traditional advertising and marketing, but they don't know your industry. And you're 3 to 6 months in, maybe you signed an annual commitment or longer, because sometimes these big agencies want to do that. And you're strapped, you're not getting any results, and you have no recourse. So it's not always a good idea just to go for that big agency because they have, all of these brands they've worked with.
Well, and then as the pendulum starts to swing back a little bit towards center, you get, well, I'll just let the office manager handle it. And that person's got a full task, a full boatload of responsibilities and everything else. And, well, yeah, I can post a picture on Instagram or Facebook, but that's not really marketing. And so then you see another big hurdle that sometimes loses not only time, but also money.
I think that is exactly right. That's what happens, right? Because now their budget is kind of shot. I have somebody that has a little free time. Let's have them do it. That person, let's use them, work with a company like us. Let's use them as an ally or an asset to help provide content, to be the boots on the ground inside the facility. We know that it's difficult in this industry to generate content because of patient privacy. So we can't just roll out there and do photos and videos and interview people willy-nilly, right? You've got to have some coordination. Well, that person can be the coordinator and a great help to a successful team. The problem for us is when they come back to us, they've already blown all their budget. So they're like, what can you do on this? And, we got really crafty at it, being able to generate results on small budgets. So then you get the other side. Okay, next year rolls around. You guys are doing great. Let's throw more money at it. I was like, no. We have to have a strategy here to grow this correctly. So It's always funny to see how it works out. I just wish they would make the right decision and come to a company that has that experience first.
Right. Well, I mean, it's always, yes, you can put out pictures and imagery and stuff like that and cute little memes, but is it on brand? What is it doing to the perception in the marketplace of your brand position, of your values, of everything that you're trying to offer, that user experience, that journey that the next patient's going to walk with you? Sometimes you can blow that up very, very quickly without even realizing it.
Well, and that's a good way to put it. The journey mapping, there's a lot of money that can go into this, and a lot of people don't understand it or actually adhere to it or follow through with it. But your advertising and marketing online should have a purpose. It's not just generating content for the sake of generating content. And it's important to note that what you produce on one particular platform might not necessarily be the same thing you produce on another platform. If you're doing something on Instagram, for example, who are you trying to reach there? Are you reaching the patient? Are you reaching an alumni? Are you reaching a loved one or a caregiver or somebody that is a facilitator of this process? And you need to have that in mind before you generate it, before you post it, before you put any media dollars behind it. And it's not always going to be the same as what you did on Facebook, right?
Well, and that's the funny thing is you start looking at ideation. So, what am I going to create content around? What themes, what topics, what's my brand voice? How am I really going to present that? I think, from my personal experience, I think you have 3 separate constituencies or audiences. You've got the prospective client, but then oftentimes you've got the influencer, who may be the family member, the loved one, the neighbor, the friend, who's going to try to engage and interact and maybe influence that person's decision. But then you've also got this other referral source out here from other practitioners that may not have your specialty, but could really use a referral source like you. And so as you develop content, you've got to play to those 3 markets. So one piece of content does not always play well in all 3 perspectives, because everybody's looking for a different cue there to spur them into action.
I see a big mistake with companies in this arena where you'll have one agency that might be great at branding, right? They might put out content that is beautiful, that paints you in an awesome light, that makes everyone want to get help from you. But they haven't done anything with true measured lead generation. So you're spending a lot of marketing dollars on a great brand, but your phone's not ringing. I've seen the flip side where people put a ton of money in lead generation, but they have no brand. Okay, if somebody's searching for help and they come across 2 ads in the top 3 of a Google search, and one of them is a company they recognize from branding, and the other one is a company they've never heard of before, chances are they'll click on the one that they're familiar with. And if they call that one and the person answers the phone in the right way and everything feels like it's a good fit, they'll never call you, right? And so I think that part of this is to understand you have to do some branding, but it also has to be with purpose, that it's going to eventually generate that call through your lead generation efforts too. And you got to do both.
And with a lot of my practitioners, and I also have a lot of exposure in the legal environment, so I'm working with a lot of law firms, and some of what I do is to create brand awareness, because there are some significant advertisers in the market. We're trying to kind of get our little piece of that, right? And so brand awareness, to your point, is one thing, but there's also that conversion path at some point, and how you structure your content, how you move them toward that decision point is critical. And you've got to be mindful when you're creating content that, you've got to lead them to a desired outcome. If not, you're just putting out content. And well, that has a place, but again, it's a business and you've got to run your practice as a business. One of the things that you brought up was measuring it. And a lot of times, what we stumbled onto is that internally, they're not prepared for that because they've got a poor process. As we were prepping for this call, you talked about somebody you were engaging with who they got the call from a prospective client and it went south from there.
Yeah, I think measuring it is something that everyone wants to say they do or admits that they don't, and then says, yeah, let's do it. And then after the fact, they're still not looking at the reports and working with an agency to understand, did this lead actually result in a patient or a client, right? So we can set up tracking on your website. We can set up call tracking so that we know if you get a phone call where it came from, and we can actually look at that user's journey to get there. We can see that they saw your Facebook ad, went to your website, clicked on these 3 pages, spent this long on the site, went away from your website, came back 2 days later because they bookmarked it in their history, clicked on a few more things, filled out a contact form, or called you on the phone. And that's one way that you can say, okay, this is a qualified lead. They really looked like they're into your stuff. It wasn't a wrong number. We look in the call tracking. The call lasted 3 minutes. If you have the HIPAA compliance piece set up and your enabled recording, you can actually audit the call. You have to be very careful about that. But you could hear, like, that's a great lead, right? Well, not everybody wants to set up the call recording, and not everybody wants to take the time to then match a phone number to a potential lead or patient. And so if you're going on a conversation with a business that says, yeah, things are great, the phone's ringing, we're getting a lot of leads, whatever, but they're not putting in the work to measure it, we're getting bad information back to us. We'll think, great, they're happy, the leads are coming in, they're qualified, maybe they're doing a VOB with the benefits that looks like they're viable, all this kind of stuff, to then find out 2 or 3, 4 months later, hey, things aren't going as well as we thought. And it's like the record scratched the needle, like, what do you mean they're not working?
You've been telling me all along the phones are ringing.
Right. And so the important thing on digital marketing is we need accurate information coming back to us so that we can dial in these campaigns and make them work for you. And if you don't give it to us, you can go 3 or 4 months and we'll just keep putting money after bad stuff. So that's something that we run into, even though we do a great job of measuring. So the clients have to be on board with putting in the time to measure those results and have an honest conversation.
Well, when it comes to honest conversations, sometimes that's not what the marketer necessarily is doing. We can bring people to the front door. We can get the phones ringing, but if the internal process or processes are not tuned up, if you haven't educated your call takers on programs or aspects of your practice so that they're familiar with, let me do this, so they can get into the conversation a little bit to keep that person on the phone to calm them down a little bit and get them moving toward hey, when can I get an appointment? And you've got a practical example of that.
I do, and this kind of falls into the age-old sales versus marketing.
Yeah.
You know, it's the marketing guy giving me junk leads. It's the sales guy can't close a deal. Well, in this industry, it often comes down to if you have an intake department or a call center, or maybe it's just a secretary answering a phone. If I give you a great lead and you can't do anything with it that a competent person should be able to, we're going to have a conflict. And you know, some clients are very honest about this when they listen to it and hear it, and they're like, dude, you sent us great leads and our guys blew it. And it was a week ago that we were having a conversation about, you know, February was a tough month for one of my clients. It's a shorter month, so it's harder to make your census. And they said, you know, you sent us a great lead. I mentioned earlier how you can track all those things. They were tracking that with our assistants, and they got them on the phone, and the potential patient, or maybe the loved one of a potential patient, said, I've been looking at your program. I've done some research. It looks like it's a good fit. Can you explain to me a little bit more about your treatment process? And the intake coordinator said, yeah, I'm not really familiar with that. Why don't you go to our website and, you know, check that out? And we're all just beating our heads against the wall because we just spent all this time and money to get that person to call to be a potential, you know, lead or admit. And they sent them back into the loop to go to the website. And if you look
where
at
they had just come from,
they just came from. And if you map that out on your whiteboard here with a diagram, that is not the loop you want to create.
Right. That does not lead to a revenue source. So,
No.
You know, that's one of the misconceptions about marketers is that we're there to take a lot of money from you, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. The reality is we want you to succeed. I mean, that's how we stay in the game with you. That's how we grow our reputations. That's how we grow our businesses. We're there because we want to understand it, but we need good feedback. We need solid feedback, and we need time from you to basically review these reports. I had literally an attorney who called me a few years back. I won't divulge any information about it, but he said, you know, Jim, our phones just haven't been ringing for quite some time. I don't know what's going on. You know, we'd switched to this other vendor and couldn't figure it out. It took me about 20 minutes. I went to their website and I started calling the phone numbers on the website. Well, when they switched vendors, the vendor just mapped or basically made a mirror image of the homepage and brought it over to the new site, did not update the tracking number, which at one point was going to the law firm, now was going to an HVAC contractor in a different county, and had been doing that for months. And I said, well, you know, I hate to say I think I found it, but have you called your own number lately? Little things like that. I mean, we look for those. We look for those disruptions in the journey. From, hey, I'm interested. We try to find ways to get people interested, but then at some point we have to hand it off to you. And little things like that. I mean, as a marketer, we're trying to figure it out, because sometimes you do have blind spots. But the closer you bring us in, the more information we're able to share candidly back and forth, the tighter that message becomes and the more successful that conversion rate becomes.
I would agree with that. And I think what you touched on there is an oversight that often happens when a client will piecemeal their services and operations. I mean, there's something to be said for hiring specialists that can come in and do certain things. But if that client doesn't have a good grasp on the marketing side with the technology, they're probably not even aware of that phone number. And so they need to depend on somebody else to do it. But if you have a separate IT provider and a separate web guy and a separate marketing guy, and you've got maybe 5 to 10 different companies, there's not really any one person that's being kind of held accountable for it.
You need a quarterback.
You do. And I think the other part of it is consistency with what you're doing. So we're all probably guilty of this to some extent. We've all done it at some point in our careers. We have a great month. Things are fantastic. We take our foot off the gas a little. We get a breath of, fresh air, like, okay, I've just really been going crazy to get these results. I'm going to relax. The problem is the clients will often do that. They're banging on the door. I need leads. I need admits. Our census is down, et cetera. And then you generate just a ton of opportunities. They're happy and they take their foot off the gas. If you don't have the right partner that's going to consistently do that month after month, and you have to knock on their door and be the squeaky wheel, then you're going to have a roller coaster of results. They'll work on another client to make them happy, and they'll forget to work on yours. So it's a consistency issue, and I think that comes from both sides, from the facility or the client and the agency.
Well, Andrew, we're about halfway through with today's episode. So before we start transitioning here a little bit, what is the best way if somebody's interested in talking to you or engaging Mediaura? How do they get in touch with you?
You can go to our website at mediaura.com. It's Mediaura, which is always fun when you have to start spelling that plus my last name, right? You get into the spelling contest. But you can also find me on LinkedIn or any of the other sites and hit me up. But we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call, fill out a contact form. We hopped on a call last night after hours with some guys that were putting together a new facility that they're opening in Florida. And their schedule was a little bit chaotic, as you can imagine, with a new kind of opening of an intensive outpatient center. And I said, that's fine. We'll make it work. Let's get on a call. And we got right into it. We're already starting to work together, and hopefully it'll be the first of many great meetings. But we're flexible in that regard that we can do that for our customers.
Absolutely. And friends, if you're listening to this this podcast episode, you probably have some show notes that are just below the audio track. If you're on my website, jimrayconsultingservices.com, there will be extensive show notes, and that'll show up in Libsyn and Apple Podcasts and some other areas. But I'll have Andrew's contact information and a link to his website there as well, just to kind of make it easy for you. So don't feel that you have to rewind this thing 5 times trying to get all the spellings down. We'll make it easy for you. It'll be there in the show notes. Andrew, when we started the discussion today, I mentioned to the people listening that there are some tips and some tactics and some considerations from a content generation standpoint that may be helpful to them. And if you don't mind, let's go ahead and start trying to transition that way. I think regardless of what type of content you're putting out, and that could be a blog post, that could be a page on your website, that could be a brief video of some sort, that could be a podcast just like this one. There's generally 3 separate objectives that I've identified anyway. You're going to either try to educate and inform. Maybe you're going to explain your approach, maybe differentiate your approach versus all the other competitors out there. And then also to describe the journey, that user experience. And some of that might be a client testimonial, or some of that might be different people in the organization talking about what they do and trying to give people a really good sense of what it would be like to walk that journey with you or at your facility or wherever. With that in mind, when you're creating content, I think it's important to make sure that you're balancing that, because different audiences, different segments of the audience have different needs.
Yeah, and I think it's having a plan, right? You can create content with these objectives and have a lot of success, but you can also create content just for the sake of creating it, right? And thinking, oh, I'm checking the boxes, I'm putting stuff out there. Do you have a purpose for it? Is it being produced professionally, right? Is it?
I got an iPhone.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll argue that something's better than nothing, right? I've been a big advocate for, hey, if you're stretched too thin, don't try to do all the platforms and all the mediums. Just do one thing really well and then build on it.
Yeah, be consistent.
Right, but that content becomes kind of a centerpiece for so many things that we can do in the marketing world. The first one is the great content you produce can be a search engine optimization gold mine, right? If you're producing something that's original, that has value to it, it can start to help you rank very well, especially for long tail keyword searches on Google.
Let's back up a little bit. If you're a practitioner going, I don't know what search engine optimization is. Basically, when something gets published online to a website page or a blog post or whatever that is, you can do some things to tune up that content so that it shows up well in Google when people are searching. That is called optimizing the content. And some of it's the words you use, some of it's how you structure it, some of it's the coding behind it. And what you're doing is you're optimizing that content for the search engines, Google, Yahoo, Bing, whatever. So search engine optimization, SEO is the common abbreviation. That's what we're talking about. Andrew, you want to explain long tail?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I forget about that.
That's okay.
I get so
We're talking
into
shop.
We're talking shop. Well, you got to have some content to produce, right? So an example of bad content that a client was doing recently, and I had to say, no. They were part of a service that offers them free content that they can use for their firm, right? And they were like, oh, great, we have all this content. Well, everybody else that is with that service has the exact same content. if it's duplicate content, Google's not going to rank you and say, you guys have great content because 1,000 of our sites have the same thing. So it's important that you're producing something that's original and that has value. And search engines will figure that out. And so as customers are seeking out your services, the more that you've done to cultivate your brand online, Google will rank that a little bit higher. And over time, you will start to show up higher in that list, not just from your paid advertisements, but what they call organically. And so the content is really the key. Now, we can take that content. What else can you do with it? Well, we can share it on social media. We can have something quality to put on Facebook or a LinkedIn. Maybe you're doing a B2B aspect of it and you want to reach professionals. That content, like I said, is kind of the centerpiece. It starts there. And if that's part of your strategy and you do it right, it just lets you go in so many different directions and have so much more opportunity to succeed.
Well, I tell you what I love about content, and the bulk of what I do in terms of producing content with clients, again, be that video, be that blog posting, be that podcasting, which is just long form content, the bulk of that, when it hits your site, it stays almost forever. I mean, it's there, and you're just building this foundation, this giant library that all of it talks about you and different aspects of your practice. Whereas when you then maybe want to amplify that, and so you bring in a Google AdWords, those are all those ads that you see when you go to Google, and the first multiple, 3, 4, 5 different results tend to be ads. Well, those are paid for. Those are pay per click. So every time somebody clicks on it, whoever's running that ad is getting charged, whether or not they call you or not, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a great way to amplify, and you can really target. There's some really good intelligence that you can use to get in there tightly. But once you turn that off, or you exceed your budget so they're no longer serving the ad, there's no residual value there. That's why it's always a unique balance between paid ads, display ads, things like that, and core content. I like to focus more on the content, and Andrew used a term a little while ago called long tail content. So believe it or not everybody searches for Louisville Addiction Treatment Center and hits enter. That's a vanity search. That is a very basic search, but other people are looking for other things, so they're more specific. So that search query, if you will, that you're typing in tends to be different. It tends to be longer, and those are more specific searches, and a lot of times those actually convert better, which is why I'm a big fan of content generation, because I think we have a better chance of putting content out there that matches up with that search intent, with what that person's actually looking for. But again, you can use these other tactics to really, really drive that awareness. But it's a balance, right?
It is a balance, and it's a balance between paid and organic. It's a balance between the various social media platforms. It's a balance trying to reach the consumers at whatever stage they are in the decision-making process, right? One thing that I've seen that tends to happen is the person that clicks on that first advertisement may be an impulsive, click, and it's a toss-up whether they're the person that is just starting out the journey, and so they just clicked on the very first thing, and they're going to make a decision in the next 2 weeks, or they could be the person that they need help today, right? And you don't really know that. So you're going to get a good blend of people that may not be paying customers right away from those paid ads, but you will find often that the person who scrolls down a little bit more and is doing their homework, and maybe they've got their eye on 2 or 3 places or 2 or 3 doctors, and they say, I really want to make sure I get the right one. They click on the organic searched keyword, and they might be ready to talk today, but they've already talked about or looked at 3 or 4 other places, and they've made their decision on you. So that could even be an easier close or an easier phone call for whoever's taking that lead. So it's a combination of doing both of them and doing them well.
Well, you brought up something about putting it out on Facebook, and again, there are paid ads on Facebook, paid ads on LinkedIn, paid ads all over the place. That's really what all of these free platforms, originally they got you used to it. You loved it. Yeah, you're committed to it. You look at Facebook before you get out of bed in the morning. And now if you want your content to get out there, you've actually got to spend a little bit of extra money with them. It's a combination, but what I like about good content is you can then cascade that among different, maybe it's a snippet on Facebook, whereas the podcast could go 15 minutes or 30 minutes of a discussion that's a little bit more detailed, a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more interactive. You may not put that entire thing out on LinkedIn or it depends on what your objectives are. But again, creating one good piece of content, you can cascade it, But again, as Andrew said earlier, being mindful that maybe for these different platforms, you've got to do a different type of content. So maybe you have a brief video for Facebook to catch the attention, and then you refer that back to the website where now you have a blog post or a podcast page or whatever. And the good news is we do this for clients every day. It's not as complicated as it seems once we understand what your objectives are and where you want to go.
Yes, and I think that if you're thinking about Facebook in general as a platform and how you want to leverage it, think about the part where somebody's going to go there to look as kind of a social proof, or is this company any good? What do their reviews look like? Right. What are other people saying? And imagine the perception of that customer if they go to your Facebook page that you have for your business, which you should, right? It's going to have a lot of positive reasons why you should have that page. And you just see like the tumbleweed like blowing across the road, right? They haven't posted in months. The last time they posted something, it didn't look very professional. They don't have
latest
a lot of
news,
reviews.
November 2019.
Right. They don't have a lot of reviews, or maybe they have some low reviews.
Yeah.
The customer may not invest their time and money and faith that this is the right decision for them. So sometimes Facebook can be a lead generation tool. Other times they're using it to kind of check reality. Is this company any good?
You know, that's a great point, because I know a lot of practitioners in different industries are worried about, well, if I give people an opportunity to comment, they might leave me a bad review. In all reality, they can already do that, and you may not even know about it. And that's the risk out there. I would rather be somewhat in control of that and generating the positive messaging that reflects well or promotes my brand position, my brand offerings more strategically for me, than just being, well, I hope somebody talks about me today. There's no strategy there. That's a prayer. That's not a strategy. And, you know, especially in mental health, I mean, you know, you've got to balance, wow, do I want patients or clients sharing my info or recommending me? Is there a HIPAA? There are ways to work through that. There really are. Don't let that hold you back. You know, you're not the first one to ever think about this or to try this.
So you mentioned a good one, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit more, because this is a question that I get from almost every client I've worked with in this space. They ask, what do I do? How do I respond to, or do I even respond to, these negative reviews I'm getting on Google My Business or Facebook? And they're always concerned about, you know, does this violate HIPAA if I acknowledge it in any way? And then balancing that with traditional best practices from, you know, these platforms on how to deal with negative reviews. My personal advice, and just keep in mind, you'll want to check with your in-house counsel or your attorneys to make sure they're in, you know, alignment with this if you have any concerns, is that you do want to engage and respond, but you have to do it professionally, delicately, and not anything that's, you're not disclosing anything that's personal. They've volunteered that they allegedly have, you know, seek treatment at your facility or have worked with you. You don't have to tell anybody in your response what they did, when they came there, or anything like that. But you do want to respond with compassion. You know, I'm really sorry that this happened. Would you like to talk about it? We are here. Give us a call. We want to do everything we can to make it right offline. What consumers are looking for, they know that there's going to be somebody complaining about something. They're often more impressed with how you respond to it, because they know there are always going to be outliers of people that are upset about something. But if you respond to it professionally and handle that in the right way, that negative review can actually work in your favor. And there's no secret sauce to removing those. You can file for them to be removed, and if you know somebody high enough up, they can do it. But there's no magic formula, click a button, and it's gone immediately. So
yeah, no, that's a great point. And it is difficult to get those removed. But again, if you're not monitoring them, if you're not adding additional content out there, the reality is those posts are going to happen anyway. And, you know, the worst case scenario is you've gone 2 or 3 years in your practice and you never knew somebody had a negative review about you because you weren't checking that. As marketers, we spend a lot of time looking for that. We scan that environment to see kind of what's going on that could impact the brand. Again, at some point, we're kind of responsible for that. So, you know, we tend to partner up with you. As we get into some other tips and tactics for you, you know, when it comes down to content, you got to remember one thing, and that's if you want it to grow, you got to feed it. So if you want better rankings on Google or Bing or Yahoo, you've got to give it more information to work with. So pages that you posted 5 years ago that maybe performed well for the first year suddenly are less relevant. And oh, by the way, I've never dusted that website out often and actually added new content. In Google's eyes, you are less relevant. And they don't even know if you're still in practice sometimes. So they're not necessarily going to serve you up. So you do need to focus on a constant stream with some kind of consistency. So here are some content topics that you might want to think about. The first and foremost is really your story as a practitioner. What was it about this area of healthcare that really compelled you to move forward? Why? What drew you to it? What's your experience? What do you get out of it? What do you love about what you do? I think that area of your story, but again, you can only talk about that so much. And the market is always concerned with, in sales, what we used to call the WIFM. What's in it for me? I don't care about you talking about you. What's in it for me? So you've really got to direct your content that way. Frequently asked questions, FAQs, great sources of content. Again, that gets back to that long tail. Hey, how do I, what are my options for heroin addiction in Clark County, Indiana? Well, now you start developing content around that using similar phraseology. And Andrew, I mean, this kind of stuff is right in your backyard.
It is, and
literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I know, right? And sadly, it is in the community still, right? No, it's the unfortunate side. But we look at it in the positive way that we're helping people, get the help that they need, right?
Yeah.
But in producing that content, think about your website and what it looks like to the average consumer, and then pull up your competitor's website and look at that, and you'll probably find that unless you've worked with somebody that's doing good content, they look a lot the same, right? Yeah. They read the same way, they say the same thing. It's a little bit cold. They all say they offer the same types of services for the most part. What you can do with rich content, like a podcast, is put a voice to it that has some human element, right? They can hear you. They feel like they're relating to you a little bit better. So you've differentiated yourself. Videos are the same way. Instead of using stock photography, can you use your own photography? So when thinking about this content, think about how you can be different from everyone else and make that connection. And it'll make the lead that much easier when they come to you.
Exactly. Brand differentiation. You see this with a lot of different professional websites that, in this industry, everybody kind of has the same 4 or 5 pages and they all kind of say the same thing. You've done nothing to gain an advantage on your competition. So the more rich content, Andrew, as you said, that goes out there, the better. Dealing with myths and misconceptions. That's another great way. I heard it was like this. Well, here's a myth. Let me kind of redirect that and give you the insight, at least from our perspective as practitioners in this segment, right? It's a good way, once again, to differentiate because now you're educating, you're overcoming an objection, you're informing, and those are valuable content pieces.
I absolutely agree with that. And there's one that comes to mind that I heard a professional, an expert actually speak on eating disorders a few years ago when I was producing a conference. And the gentleman laid out some tough facts about what do I expect? What's the recovery rate like? What's the mortality rate like? And you could hear a pin drop at some of these numbers, and the entire room, even the room full of professionals, they should know this stuff. They were all moved, right? The significance of it. Imagine if you're going to get help, if you know really what to expect, right? You don't want to scare somebody to death, literally, right? But you want to give them a chance to understand and to learn the process that often is really overlooked, and people are distraught or confused. They don't understand things. They may need some tough love. They may need to hear things like, hey, part of this problem's at home. And if you can get somebody to kind of buy into that and understand it, I think personally the chance of somebody recovering from something like an addiction is substantially greater because everybody understands now. It's not just send them to this place and they magically get better. It's a process.
Well, you mentioned 2 really important things there. And we, as marketers, we have to do this well, is setting the proper expectation with your prospective client. I mean, one that is important, but also authenticity. Hey, look, this is a challenge. This is real, and sometimes it's ugly. But the more real and authentic you're being when the others aren't, I think that adds to your credibility.
I think if you do it consistently and you're doing it the right way, you can alleviate those concerns that people have about liability. I think that's why a lot of people don't want to put themselves out there.
Yeah.
But if you can do it in the right way and consistently, I think it puts you in a very powerful position.
Well, here's another content topic for you. Your commentary, your thoughts on current events. You know, obviously we're going through COVID lockdowns and the kiddos have been out of school, and there's a lot of information out there right now about the long-term effects on the lack of socialization. If that's your field, putting out bits and pieces from your perspective as a practitioner is valuable. That's the kind of stuff that gets picked up and shared online, which again is free advertising for you. It's free exposure for you, but you're starting to carve out a reputation there, right? Because people may, again, resonate with that. They may say, hey, I'm dealing with that issue. It sounds like you're authoritative in that area. Maybe that leads to at least the beginning of a conversation.
Well, you see it very popular on the news networks. They bring in the expert. What do you think about this situation that's happening? What's the expert's point of view on it? There's a nonprofit I work with, and an idea came up the other day. They said, we would really like to talk more about some of the political things that are happening in our country that impact us, because they're very motivated to help people that are dealing with trauma, right? And they say, how is the political environment harming people? And we said, well, you might want to be a little bit careful, right?
Yep.
It's a delicate subject. And what we came up with that might be a good solution is, why don't we use the media on television shows or movies that are dealing with issues that are portraying what might be happening in our real world, and comment on those and have a discussion about, what are you seeing here that is abusive in that relationship? What are you seeing here that is a behavioral pattern that matches something that we're trying to deal with, so that you can educate people about it. And so that's a way for them.
It's a safer approach.
To have some social commentary about it, because now they're not directly getting involved with some of the sticky topics of our world today, but they're doing it in an entertainment way, but to educate.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways that you can take things like that and use them as content opportunities.
Another content topic for you to consider posting about and writing about is if you're doing a presentation, or you've written an article somewhere, or you're attending an event, to stay current, even if it's just to get your educational units that you have to have for your license anyway. Let people know, hey, look, I'm staying relevant. Yes, everybody else has to do that in your profession, but you're the only one pointing it out. You tend to be a little unique and special that way. So, I mean, that's another area. And then, finally, I'll wrap up with this one, is discussions with other colleagues. Maybe they're in your practice. If you've got multiple practitioners there, maybe it's a colleague from a different type of therapy that you want to bring in, or maybe it's a related professional who, again, just kind of touches your world in terms of your client's world. Bringing those people on and working together on that, again, it promotes both of you, but at the same time, it exposes you to another audience that you may not have cultivated yet.
Well, you've got a great one that you could probably do very easily, and that's bring in somebody that's maybe an attorney or a professional in that field, with somebody that deals with addiction treatment, and have a conversation about how that impacts people in that industry in a unique way. Maybe how they have to be delicate about how they seek treatment, how the struggles of that can lead somebody to drinking too much or whatever it is. And that changes the conversation, but it opens it up to a specific channel where you might get a lot of referrals. Hey, I heard your podcast. I'm an attorney. I'm a judge. I'm this. I have this problem. I can't talk about it with anybody else, and get the help. So being able to kind of cross over there is a good thing sometimes.
Well, let's use that last part about bringing on other related professionals or colleagues onto this. Everybody's always worried about the expense. Wow, this seems like it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. One thing that you might consider, especially if you're a solo practitioner, is do a collaborative podcast or do a collaborative video series to where you're working with somebody else, because it does a few things. It, one, allows you to split the cost or share the cost. It's a co-branding opportunity, so the people that are following that individual now have learned about you and vice versa, so there's a win-win there for both people. Sometimes when you're producing content like this, I mean, Andrew and I know each other, so we're feeding off each other's energy, we're feeding off each other's perspectives and thoughts. It makes the lift a lot lighter for both of us, so there's a synergy there. And it also reduces the time. I might have a situation where, okay, I'm going to take this topic and go solo on this one, and then next episode, why don't we come together on a different topic, and then the following week, maybe you take one by yourself, and it still allows you to get your name and your brand out there, but it's a great way to reduce the effort. And again, that's in time, that's in prep, that's in cost. I like a lot of those ways, and there's ways to think out of the blocks, that it doesn't just have to be your own podcast. Or would I prefer it to be? Sure, absolutely, because then we can talk about you.
Right.
I think that's 100%. But again, finances sometimes are a constraint. Later on, you can spin off if you wanted to. But there's a lot of different ways to do this, and I think people like to listen to a conversation. I mean, at some point, you're going to be done with this podcast here in a few minutes, and you think, wow, Andrew could have done that whole thing by himself, or Jim could have, but I like the interplay. Sometimes that just keeps the audience interested. The thing is here, don't get overwhelmed. I mean, we can really, really make this entire initiative, this entire concept simple for you. It's a matter of having a good strategy, being able to deploy that strategy, and then having the content to feed that strategy. And that's where a lot of people get lost. They get down in the weeds. And again, they're really, really good practitioners, but they're not great marketers. We bring those skills.
Yeah. And I think earlier I touched on consistency. Imagine if you didn't have somebody to help coordinate this. Imagine that you were trying to do this on your own. I've been wanting to sit down and do something like this for a few months, and I get busy, I forget about it, I have other things going on. You need to put in the commitment to do this, and having somebody to help coordinate it and make it happen is so key.
Yeah,
and just keep doing it. Don't do it once and forget about it. You keep producing that content, consistency.
Absolutely. Andrew, my friend, again, I know you're busy. We talked about our schedules before we even turned the mics on. I know you're running like crazy here, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming over. Thanks for participating in this and contributing so much to this episode. I really, really respect what you do over there.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope all the listeners have enjoyed what we've talked about, and I'm just excited to do it. I look forward to doing it again, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Friends, I hope you found some insights in here that are helpful to you. I hope you found some informations that maybe just kind of piqued your interest. And if so, by all means, we're here to help. Again, the contact information for Andrew and for Mediaura will be in the show notes. And the one thing I can ask you to do is, if you liked the information that we provide, if you like this style of format, by all means, subscribe to the podcast. The podcast is called Grow For It. You can find it all over the place. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Google Play or Google Podcast. We're on iTunes. We're on iHeartRadio. We're everywhere. If you like this, one of the best things you could do for me is just subscribe. If you're new to podcasting, when you subscribe to a podcast, that doesn't mean you're spending money. All that means is that you're going to get a notification when a new episode is published. That way you never fall behind, and you can keep abreast of kind of what's going on and keep up with the podcast. So we really appreciate it. Once again, Andrew, thanks for your time. And friends, if you've made it to the end of this podcast, I want to say thank you for your time as well. I really appreciate it. And if you're ready, let's grow for it.